If your client today is a school system in the middle of Nebraska, and don't for a second think it's just Nebraska's law, because they've got data in there for 25 years, and those kids have now moved on all over the country. So it's really where the individuals live today that matters, not where they lived when you dealt with them as a company or entity, or not where you're located necessarily. It's going to be all of the above. And especially if anybody has a website where they have things like username and password coming into play, because all kinds of law out there defining what is or isn't PHI or PII. Give you a quick example. The statutes have all come into play, and just last year, 2015, I have a whole slide on this. Just last year, the statutes, 15 states changed their statutes. Some added papers, in the definition. Some added username and password as something that's personally identifiable information that triggers these duties. I mean, everybody on this call has gotten a letter at some point or another in the last 5 years saying, hey, XYZ company had your data, and we may have compromised it, and here you can get credit monitoring. Those aren't being written because people are all of a sudden good corporate citizens. They're being written because that's what the law demands. So, it's that need that ends up driving the first-party cost of this. So, kind of stepping back, most companies gather the data, and they have data that they don't even realize they have. The statutes came into play over the last decade or so, and they constantly change and evolve. And then the risks are changing. One of the things I hear all the time from brokers is their clients say to them, hey, we're not big enough to be hacked by China. So here's the short answer. The short answer is that's correct. However, you are big enough to be hacked by bad guys. And what the bad guys do is they don't pick on what your business. They send out these auto bots into the world of the internet. They just look for software packages. Do they or don't they have, Windows XYZ? Do they or don't they have, this or that software package? And then it pings them and says, well, here's a list of 2 million companies that have it. Then they look at those 2 million companies, again, all automated. And they say, well, who has the latest patches installed? Let's say 95% do, which would be high, and 5% don't. Well, now they have 5% of that couple million that don't have the patches installed. And now they can decide based on those companies who they want to go hack. So yeah, I mean, China's not going to hack your client if they're a $30 million company. But depending on what industry they're in, the Russian or the Eastern European groups can certainly do it. One of the things we saw recently was a rash during tax season of W-2 scams where they get an email and they can mimic emails coming in. So the boss, the president, the CEO, allegedly writes an email to the human resources people or the COO or the CFO on a Friday and says, hey, I'm working on a deal. I need the spreadsheet from last year's W-2s. Get me it now. I need it in 5 minutes. Most people realize that's a scam. A lot didn't. So we had dozens, if not scores of cases come in over the last couple of weeks where that kind of data was sent, because when you look at that inline on the from, it looks like a legitimate email. The problem is when you hit reply, it goes overseas, and the people don't always check the reply line in terms of the email address. So we saw a lot of that. Not only that, the bad guys are so well organized that we saw that fraud happen, and within 48 hours, the people whose data went flying out the door had already had IRS forms with false information and automatic refunds happening with the IRS. The IRS is so messed up that when you tell them, oh, this 10% already had fraud, can you protect the other 90% of my employees? Their answer is, we don't have our act together. We can't stop it. We can only let you know when it happens. So, that's just a function of the IRS having 30 different systems implemented over the last 30 years, and they don't talk to each other. So, that's just one typical example where you don't even have to have clients. All you have to have is employees and ex-employees, and that scam works. So the risks are coming really from 3 big buckets. One is bad guys, which is the hackers and the scammers. 2 is people just make mistakes. Sort of circling back, if you don't keep your patches on your computer systems up to speed, you are vulnerable by definition, because bad guys find what's called a 0-day defect in some software package, and if you don't immediately patch it, then the bad guys are out there exploiting those packages and diving into your systems. I mean, think about it. The Target breach, which is one of the biggest in the history, that was caused because an HVAC vendor was going into the payment system to get paid. They got hacked, and somehow the bad guys got from that company into Target and then into Target's customer base. That's horrendous in terms of the amount of data that was exposed, all because somebody who probably thought they didn't have any real exposure on cyber did. So, where the bad things happening, malicious actors, that's one. Two is mistakes. People just don't get the patches in time, or they make mistakes. It happens all the time. Three is vendors. People think, oh, well, I outsource everything. I don't do my own payroll. Yeah, but the guys who do the payroll get hacked, and that's your problem. The concept is called data ownership. Here's what that is. If an individual gives their data to you, whether it be your employee or your customer, then under the law, you're going to be responsible for shepherding and making sure and ensuring that that data is never compromised. Even if a vendor of yours has the problem and it's clearly not your fault, it's still your fault under the law, meaning you're the ones who have to make sure the letters go out and they're compliant with the law, and you're reporting to the AGs, and you're offering credit monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. So those kinds of expenses are significant, and they happen regardless of the fact that you had some kind of service level agreement that you thought protected you. Now, anybody who's dealt with a contractual dispute knows the minute you turn around and throw a contract at somebody and say, you agreed to do this, first thing you do is run out and get a lawyer. And then they fight you on it, and they fight back and forth, and 6 months later you might get some of that money back. But you didn't respond quickly to the event because you thought someone else was going to handle it for you. So that kind of gets me to talking about, if we can go to the next slide, Julian, that'd be great. This is a snapshot, since we only have another 10 minutes, of what happens when a breach happens. So what happens is you have an 800 number for your clients, and let's assume they've actually listened to you and understood that they have this risk. I would also tell you this, just to protect yourselves, make sure you have a written record of offering to discuss cyber risk with them, because we're seeing more and more brokers get sued for not either placing the coverage at all or not placing enough coverage. You guys know how that works. You mention it to somebody, they say they're not interested, they poo-poo it, they move on. A year later they have a problem, they're blaming you for not forcing them to do it. So just make sure you have a written record of that. But what happens when the actual breach happens? Let's say it's a small law firm or a small accounting firm or a firm like that. Well, what happens is they call the 800 number, they get on the phone with me or my team, and we explain to them, minute one, we're their lawyers. We're not the lawyers for the insurance carrier, we're their lawyers under their policy. It's no different than, if you get in that fender bender and you tap somebody from behind, they turn around and sue you for soft tissue injuries in their neck, and you're sort of rolling your eyes. But your carrier gives you that lawyer to protect you in that case. We're that lawyer. We're the lawyers who come in and get on the phone with the client, the insured, your client, and explain to them minute one. And this can be at 8 o'clock on a Friday night. We'll take the call because we see the call come in. We run through conflicts, and we call them. We say, hey, we just saw you called in. We cleared your conflicts through, and we're here to help. We're your lawyers. Anything you say is protected by privilege. What's going on? And they tell us. It could be any number of scenarios. It could be the W-2 scam. It could be we think we're getting hacked. It could be we can't use our systems. Another thing that's happening a lot is this ransomware that's out there. Somebody clicked on the wrong link and every computer in the company just got locked up. It could be the basic, we lost a laptop that wasn't encrypted. What do we do? Any of those scenarios may require not only us, but us bringing in forensics or the experts, and we're not them. We bring in forensics under the terms of the policy and under the coverage, and we get the forensic guys on the phone with them that night, and we let the IT guys talk to the IT guys and figure out what's going on. I mean, we're just lawyers, so our job is to shepherd and coach, whatever resources we need. So let's assume it comes in, as I've seen this plenty of times, not only do they need forensics because their systems are half locked down, but also the word is out in the local community or in the client base. What are they going to do in terms of messaging? They don't even know what's going on. And they're already having clients call and say, what the heck's going on here? Well, you can bring in PR. So we have access to bring in PR team. We have access to bring in forensics, which we will do. And as we are monitoring all this to make it even more complicated, let's assume the reason you found out there was a problem was because local law enforcement showed up and said, yeah, we found out that you guys are getting hacked, or it could be the Secret Service or the FBI for that matter. And, you're on a list of 50 companies who are getting hacked. Did you know that? So now you're dealing with potentially forensic issues, law enforcement issues, as well as PR issues. What do you tell your clients? What do you tell your employees when you don't even have the answers yourselves? All of those things are happening at the same time. Our job is to identify them and help you develop the different work streams to address all of that literally immediately. So by the time you get off call one, we already know which are the critical issues to get done. Is it forensics? Is it PR? Is it law enforcement? Heck, we've seen law enforcement come in trying to be helpful and say things like, well, give us the servers that are involved and we'll have them looked at. I'll translate that to you. That means we'll take them and they'll sit in a room for 6 weeks before we might get to them. That's not going to keep your client in business. So we have to manage those guys. And I've got 5 ex-district attorneys on my team. And one of the way you manage them is you get them on the horn with the FBI or local law enforcement and say, hey, we'll take the laboring or on the forensics. We'll report back to you. And they say, okay, great. And that way you don't lose your computers, and that way you stay in business and you don't lose your ability to conduct business. So anyway, you get through and you see the slide, and all those things under investigation need to be figured out. When did it happen? Is it over? Are you safe? Etc. Once you have your arms around that over those first 2, 3, 5 days, you're also figuring out, well, based on what happened, did we actually have a breach? I mean, we've had plenty of cases where bad guys get in and we have forensics say, yeah, they got in, but they never got to this database. So although you had an intrusion into your system and you triggered your policy and you had rumors and you brought in forensics, you don't really have to do any letters. You don't have to tell anybody this happened other than what you're dealing with already. Okay, good. That's the A answer. The not A answer is, yeah, they got into private information as defined by statutes in all these different states, and you have to comply with it. And that's what we do in the bottom left here. We figure out whether they be state or federal or what kind of obligations you have, some of which may be contractual. If somebody deals with, a client like a CPA firm or a law firm has contracts with their clients, and they may have obligations, and we see it all the time now, where they have to tell their business clients if they have a suspected data privacy event, not even a confirmed one. What do you do with that? Let's assume you did trigger some notice issues on the right. Then we go out, again, under the policy, and we bring in teams and companies. Again, this is not us. We bring them in under privilege, and we work out all the wording of the letters and all the messaging for the frequently asked questions. Because trust me, if your client has to tell hundreds or thousands of clients or employees that something like this happened, and their social security numbers or their credit card numbers or their healthcare information is somehow out there in the world now, to be misused, get a lot of questions. So you better have the right frequently asked questions and answers with a call center so your own team is not overwhelmed, with the ability to then flip them from the call center into signing up for a product where credit monitoring or ID monitoring is available, all of which you want to do to keep your client base happy. And I should point this out. At the end of the day, this is a legally driven problem, but it's a business problem. It's not a legal problem. This is about your clients keeping their clients and their employees happy. And they don't want to lose clients or employees as a result of one of these fiascos. So all of the stuff we're talking about in terms of the offerings and the credit monitoring, you offer them maybe a little more than the law requires because you want them to feel like they're getting taken care of. So that's what this notice method stuff is on the right. Some of the other things to deal with at the other end. Let's assume one of your clients has a breach and it's a law firm and they lose 10,000 records of 10,000 individuals, which is not a big number in terms of what we see all the time. We get about 300 to 350 breaches a year, getting almost one a day, including weekends. So 10,000 is certainly not a small number, but it's not 4 million, which we see those too. But let's just say it's just 10,000. Well, they're not going to be able to send 10,000 letters out and keep it organized, figure out who got what letters came back, who called, what they said when they called, what escalations were needed. All that gets handled by these vendors. And then you've got inquiries from state regulators. You have to know the laws and know how to comply with them. States like Indiana, Vermont, California, Pennsylvania, they'll pick up the phone or they'll write a letter to your client saying, hey, we got this notice, thank you. Now we have the following questions. So if you're not set up to defend those and ahead of it already, you're going to have an issue. One of the things we've noticed with regulators, and again, this is pertinent to your clients, is it drives me crazy, by the way, but the regulators come in and they don't just ask about the breach, they ask about 3 years of data privacy policies, procedures, training, and enforcement prior to the breach. Because they're looking for people they can pick on, and the way they do that is to say, well, you had a breach, and oh, by the way, you did a lousy job on data privacy issues for the 3 years before the breach. That means you didn't take it seriously. We're going to fine you. You don't want that. So one of the things that these policies do is they give you our assistance throughout with all the different experts and the notice obligations and managing that process, but it also gives you access to us to manage the regulators when they come back at you, or God forbid somebody gets sued in litigation. Now, I will tell you, only about 5 to 10% of the clients that we have get sued. That's just a function of plaintiff's attorneys aren't going to sue you usually if you lose 500 records. There's just not enough money in it for the plaintiffs to leverage. But if you lose 50,000, you might get sued. If you lose 100,000, you're going to get sued. So you have to be ready for all of that stuff. And you have to be ready before it happens so that when it happens, your business doesn't blow up and melt down. So those are the really quick version of what happens in terms of the risk and what we see. I can tell you this, anybody who thinks that they've outsourced this risk because they contract people to do different services for them, they're dead wrong. The best a contract is going to do is send some money to you 6 months later after you've argued about the indemnity clause. It's not going to give you the lawyer within 5 hours or within 2 hours of the phone call. It's not going to get you forensics. It's not going to get you dealing with the PR issues or dealing with your employee issues or the regulators or any of that. So just sort of when you hear that objection, just be aware to talk about the first party piece of this more than anything else. So I've gone about 22 minutes. Am I allowed at 20? So I'll stop yapping at everybody and see if there are questions.
Sure. And just a reminder, everyone is muted, so if you could just ask your questions using the question chat box, and then I will read them to John. We do have one question that just came in. What is your expected response from notice of claim or incident to implementing information for employees?
Yeah, so let's do the time frame. Usually it goes like this. You'll have your client will have an 800 number. They'll call it. I think the literature promises within 2 to 4 business hours, they'll get a call from us. They usually get that call within the hour. So we try to beat the promise. So it would be very rare for them to wait more than 2 hours to get an initial phone call from us. We've already run conflicts by that time, so we're off and running within 2 hours. Whether or not we message to employees is driven by the facts that are presented during the phone call. If the employees don't know about it, and only the management suite knows about it, or IT and management, that's one level of critical timing. If the word's already out in the employee base, then we have to go that night and start working up the messaging. And a lot of times, if you have to do it, if you lose your employees' data and the word's out, we'll often do a letter to the employee, an email, knowing full well it's not statutorily compliant where you have to write letters. But that's okay because you get in front of it via the email, you get the right messaging out the next morning, and then even in the email you say, you'll be getting a more complete letter pursuant to state law as applicable, over the next week or two. But right now we didn't want to wait. We could have waited 30 days under the law, but we told you, the day after. So you always want to seem as transparent as you can to employees in particular, but really to the client base in general.
Okay. Another question, how are the data breach response service providers selected?
So they're pre-selected actually by your company in conjunction with what was then ACE and is now Chubb ACE ahead of time. And the way you make the cut on that, and I guess this applies to my firm too, is you're proven in the market to know what you're doing in this space and doing it well and frequently and that's your whole business model, which it is. So we've already picked, and you guys can talk internally about who you're using, but we've already gone through with you guys a pretty heavy selection process on forensics, on the mailing people, on PR. I will tell you this, nobody gets any kickbacks for using these guys. We use them because they're good, and if they stink, they get fired. And we've been at it for over 10 years, so we've winnowed out the people who can't get it done, a long time back.
Okay. Another question, will a breach coach be able to provide IT or technical support if a breach is suspected?
Absolutely not. I mean, no. Any lawyer who says they can do it is lying or incompetent. No, we bring in the experts that you guys have already identified as being appropriate and use them. So anybody who's a lawyer who's worth their salt knows when to say they don't know something. We don't know that level of IT. Do I know more IT than the average lawyer coming out of law school? Probably. but do I know anything compared to a real IT guy? Nope. So we bring in experts to do that stuff.
Okay, let's see. Should an insured call the breach coach or notify the carrier if they receive a cyber extortion threat?
Yeah, so the best model here is, and I believe I'm right when I say this, the Schnurr model is going to be an 800 number that goes to you guys and us and the carrier all at the same time, with the understanding that it'll be the breach firm who responds directly. But while we're doing that, we will typically get an email from Chubb/ACE saying, hey, we're confirming coverage for this entity. They do have coverage. Here's what it looks like. So usually all three, the breach firm, the broker, as well as the carrier, in the way you guys have it set up, will all get notice at the same time. By the way, that notice is probably not per se notice under the policy. It's just notice of an issue. And then based on what happens next, you guys as the brokers will help them determine with our input whether or not it's got teeth and really needs to be a claim, or it was sort of just no harm, no foul. Because people call and they're not sure. And it's better that they call and we spend some time with them than it is that they don't call and they screw it up by waiting too long.
Okay. Is it normal for Chubb or ACE to send a letter from Addie with reservation of rights?
Well, the answer is I don't really know, depending on the facts, guys. I mean, what I don't do is I don't get too heavily, we don't, and we're not allowed to get too heavily into coverage. I know this, that because it's crisis management and people have a way of freezing when they get those letters and they don't know what to do because they're not sure they have coverage, I mean, that's where communication between the broker, you guys, and Chubb is going to be critical, because you don't want reservation of rights letters flying at the same time you're trying to fix an emergency. It does have a way of slowing things down.
Okay, there is a question coming in about the specific to the Schnurr program that just says, is it admitted or not admitted? We are admitted in most states, I think 43 right now, but the list is on our website. So if you go to schnurr.com/cyber, you'll see the current list of states that are currently admitted, but there are non-admitted options in the remaining states. Okay, let's see. If there is a conflict of interest between an insured and the breach response coach, how is that best resolved?
One of two ways. It doesn't happen often. I'd say 1% of our cases. But if it happens, the firm, meaning you guys and ACE/Chubb, have a backup law firm identified to handle it. That's one. And two, the other way is to waive the conflict. I mean, if it's some random lawyer at my firm, because we do 1,000 lawyers, as a co-defendant representing a co-defendant, in Seattle, and and your client is in Virginia, generally speaking, people don't care about those kind of conflicts and they're waived easily. But if we can't get it waived for whatever reason, we just kick it back to Chubb and say, use the alternative lawyer.
Okay, let's see. This is a long question. Your real-life examples were excellent, like the W-2 email from the CEO, lack of installed patch entities, and the data ownership issues. The question is, will you put these into writing or have some slides with this information that we can share?
Yeah, I have a gazillion PowerPoints and slides, and I'll work with you guys to help you guys do those presentations, webinars, etc. I've been at this for, like I said, over 10 years, and I've spent just a boatload of time with slides, and we can put a lot of that stuff and already have a lot of it in writing. So I'm happy to work with you guys to create maybe a cheat sheet that you guys can use, a 5-slide PowerPoint that you can roll out that's simplified but to the point. Yeah, that's easy.
Great. And also on our website, on schnurr.com/cyber, we do have, I think, about 7 real-world examples right now that kind of break down different points of the cyber policy, as well as a couple other pieces of collateral that provide examples and give you points and tips of frequently asked questions and different objections you may hear from clients regarding cyber. So there's a plethora of information on our website right now. And of course, yes, we will work with you, John, to create some more data. Okay, those are the only questions that have come in so far. Oh, I lied. Here's one. Would the policy respond if the client is fined by by regulators for the failure to have a data breach policy in place?
So you guys are the brokers, and I, like I said, I can't specifically weigh in on that, but I will tell you, generally speaking, the answer to that question is yes. In the world that I live in, when people get fined post data breach, they will typically be fined for some combination of less than stellar policies, procedures, etc., like that example, as well as the breach combined. And those are typically covered where they can be. There's always that debate about, is it punitive and is it covered, et cetera, et cetera. But by and large, in the business, it tends to be covered.
Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to see who's on the call from our team, Mark or Dennis. If there's anything you want to add to John's responses here, please feel free to jump in. Let's see. This one we may need one of our guys. How do you deal with large accounting firms that are unable to specifically identify how many records exist in their database?
Well, yeah, that's very normal, first of all, and that's where you use forensics. So what in that instance, what happens is the firm knows enough to buy the policy. That's one. That's good. We get involved. They had maybe somebody got access to their systems. We don't know how yet. There's a lot of different ways that can happen. Our job when we bring in forensics is really threefold, and this is in the simple way is this. Here's what a forensic guy does for me in layman terms. They get in that system of your clients, they find the bad guy, and they kill the bad guy. That's really what they do. Find them and get them out of the system. Make sure they're out. Make sure they've not left any back doors, any of that stuff. That's one. Two, tell me where the bad guy went. And that's critical because depending on where the bad guy went, you either do or don't have a whole bunch of notice obligations and issues. Three, tell me where they didn't go. So let's just use your accounting firm. If they've got 2 million records, they didn't even know it, but by the time the forensics are done, they'll know it. So they figured out they've got roughly 2 million records. They knew that they were hacked. Bad guys got to some PII, but it turns out it was only 50,000 records. So yeah, they're going to be doing 50,000 letters, but they're not mailing letters to 1,950,000 other people. That's a pretty good result. So that's usually what it is. The simple version is find the bad guy and get rid of them. Tell me what records were involved, and tell me what records were not involved. And with those three big sort of umbrella elements, you can generally have a sense of what's what.
Okay, 2 more questions came in. Does the policy cover actual computer equipment, such as if a system is taken hostage and it is deemed unrepairable and a server might be physically replaced?
So again, I'll let the broker and the underwriters deal with that. I can tell you, generally speaking, no. I know that there are some policies floating around, at least in theory, that do address the hardware being damaged or physical damage coming from it, but in the market, generally that is the rare exception.
This is Jason Bucher, and you are correct on our program. It does not cover the physical property, only the software.
Right. Now, Jason, it might, I'm not sure if you guys do, but sometimes they also have sort of a digital asset replacement. So let's just say, that somebody loses 10 computers. You're not going to pay for 10 computers, but there might be some money there to help them get reloaded and, from backup and get the right software on it. But that's going to be something you guys know better than I.
All right, another question. Might some breaches be related to terrorism, and if so, would it be covered? Jason, you may want to speak to that one.
We carve back for acts of cyber terrorism for data breach and other coverage components. Where it excludes is for an act that is determined by like government, I guess, as an act of terrorism under TRIA. There's a weird little nuance to cover there, but acts of cyber terrorism are not excluded by the policy.
Yeah, that'd be really hard to define because we see a lot of cases where the bad guy, we've had the Syrian Electronic Army and Anonymous, and who's to say who's a terrorist or a state actor? I mean, heck, on the Sony case, which is a big case that everybody had heard about, our own government said that was North Korea. And was that terrorism? Was that an act of war? What was it? So it's good that there's that coverage.
Great. Okay, no other questions have come in, so looks like we can go ahead and wrap up.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, John, very much. This session was recorded, so it will be on our website probably in the next couple of days if you want to re-listen. And then, like I said before, any other information that you need, you can find a lot of it on our website at schnurr.com/cyber. So again, thank you all very much for joining, and have a great day.
Thank you.